Welcome back to Foiling Week 2022 and the Foiling Week Forum. I am your host, Chris Museler. We are here on the shores of Lake Garda in Italy, and this is the 9th running of Foiling Week. And we've got a bunch of forum sessions going on right now. This is a pre-recorded session. So we have someone from France, someone from Guatemala City, and we have someone that may be coming in from Maui. And the topic today, before I introduce our guests, has to do with the exotic term of flow state and the decision-making processes when things are moving too fast for you to actually think about it. And that's what happens when we start to make craft, boats and motorboats go faster and faster in the ocean and on lakes and rivers with hydrofoiling. Piloting boats, that's why we call them pilots. They are flying craft and they're going a lot faster. So you have to think a lot quicker. And at some point it's too fast to think. And the other side of it too is when you go on these kind of craft or any kind of craft that goes fast over a long period of time, it gets really hard to manage decision making. So without any further ado, we have two awesome guests here today and one more may be joining us. We have Clarice Kramer. France. She is a solo around the world sailor. She was the top woman in the last Vendée Globe, and which is solo nonstop around the world. And we have Charlie Pucciarello, who's coming to us from Guatemala City. He is a former Navy F-14 fighter pilot, and now he flies for a commercial airline, and that's why he's on a layover in Guatemala City. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The reason why we brought these two on, the other guest that we have, hopefully she'll show up, is Julia Mancuso, who's a very decorated Olympic skiing medalist from the United States. She's in Maui. We might have some connectivity issues there. And she's also a foiler. So the reason why we have these two guests is we want to really kind of break down a part of foiling and other types of high-speed extreme sports that we get into with the technology that we have in the marine industry and the sailing industry these days, and talk about the human element. We talk in Foiling Week a lot about the technical side of things. Clarice's boat that she sailed around the world with, her dagger boards, the hydrofoils that are on the Imoca class that she sails. We talk to all the top designers in the world, the engineers, the manufacturers, the carbon wizards that put those together, and the technicians that work on the load cells that manage that data. But we don't talk enough to the athletes that have to sail these things that go faster and faster. Clarice has to make decisions while a boat's moving at 25, 30 knots sometimes, or even more, for 3 months at a time. Charlie, on his missions, I'm not too sure what his longest mission was on a fighter jet, but moving at those speeds, it's a slightly different equation, but it may be the same kind of learning that you can get from the training exercises that Charlie does and the training exercises that Clarice does in terms of making sure that they're thinking clearly and they're making proper decisions. So I guess we're going to start by talking, maybe I'll talk to Charlie first. It seems to me that the speeds that you go in a jet for periods of time are so fast that it's really hard to make judgment calls, but you have to do it all the time when you're in a plane like that. Can you explain to me the correlation of this term flow state, meaning making decisions when it's hard to think about decisions, and flying a fighter jet?
Well, I think what's in the fighter jet, you're looking at what your type of mission is. So sometimes you can have a very extended long mission, or sometimes you have a very specific task that you really need to be 100% engaged in. So one example would be flying, 500 knots at low level, ingressing a target in a mountainous area. We like to look at things, we call it a task bucket. And you can't overload your bucket, because if you put more in the bucket, it just falls out. And your most important task always is to make sure you don't impact the ground, because you die. So you look at that and you say, okay, well, I need to fly the airplane. I got to fly on the route. I got to fly on time. What else can I do? What can I add to the bucket? So you look at either shrinking the task or trying to expand your bucket. But we know our brain is limited, so the bucket doesn't get much bigger. So you look at, how can technology help me? How can I shrink the task? How can I prepare beforehand to shrink some of those tasks in my bucket? And that's sort of the overview of how you would look at it from a mission standpoint, and say, where can I be overloaded at this point? But everyone's been in that situation where I'm overloaded with tasks, and the first thing you need to do is make sure you don't die and make sure you're flying the plane in the right direction away from the ground if need be. So that's an overview.
It sounds, well, we'll talk about training in a little bit for both of you, because one of the end products of this discussion has to be what more average people than you superheroes can gain from this in terms of mental acuity and decision making, whether it be flying craft or just decision making when you feel overwhelmed in your own life. Clarice, I heard a lot of similarities to what Charlie was saying in terms of prioritizing. Of everything that you have to manage. It seems to me that on a daily basis in a 3-month or less around the world race, while you're piloting a craft at speed and dealing with autopilots and trimming sails and managing yourself and weather routing, that you have to do a lot of the same prioritizing. Is that, did you see anything familiar in what Charlie was saying?
Yeah, especially on the fact that your brain is limited and you have to make choices. The very I think specific thing about offshore sailing and especially when you're by yourself is that you're very tired. So it's very difficult to make decisions the way you make them usually. It means when you take time and you know that your brain is working 100% of your brains, and because you're tired, so you know that you're probably not making the perfect decision. So one of the main things for me is to accept that you're doing your best and not to rethink everything all the time. Like I've made this decision, so I'm going to stick to it. And now I accept that it is what's going on, and I accept the consequences of this decision. I'm talking specifically about weather decisions and the course you're picking and the course you're choosing. Because if you're tired and your boat goes very fast and you keep thinking about what have I done wrong? Is it the right decision? Should I change my course? If you keep questioning yourself all the time, you're just going to use too much energy, and you're always trying to limit the energy you're using. So I think I recognize a few things about having the feeling that your brain is limited and you have to do your best and to sort of I don't know how to say it, but to sort of be a little bit of if you're a perfectionist at sea, when you're by yourself on such a boat, you're going to have a lot of trouble.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And it seemed to me that in Clarice's decision making, it's stretched out over a long time, but still in a very extreme environment. Charlie, in your case, there's not a lot of margin for error actually for what Clarice does, and there's not a lot of margin for error what you do. Mistakes, in her case, it's the same way. She ends up on the ground. The boat would end up all the way down if she made a big mistake, and you would end up on the ground too. I know that seems morbid, but you guys think about these things. So, Charlie, for your case, and let's go back to this term of flow state, because there's two different types of flow, and we can define it too. I define it as making decisions more on the subconscious level than on the conscious level, and that maybe builds up with gradual training and preparation and experience. Do you in the flight community, do you guys talk about that, like in high-speed decision making?
I don't think we've ever discussed it as flow state, but depending on the duration, what we would talk about is this ultra situational awareness that you can have. Where,
okay.
You imagine you're leading a strike with multiple airplanes, and it's that state where what every other airplane is doing. You're anticipating what's happening. You're looking at what plan A, B, and C is, and you're delegating. And you even remember what everyone's doing, so you can debrief this. And this is, you see this, the really talented people who can do this thing can remember all this stuff, but they can direct it. They can listen to 3 different radios at one time and understand it, process it, and start directing, the strike, even when they're being attacked from different angles, because no plan survives contact with the enemy, as they say. So you might have a plan, hey, it's even like sailboat racing. I'm going to start at the pin, do this and do that. good luck. You know, it never goes that way, right? It's always something happens, something unexpected. So, you know, ultra situational awareness is sort of what you would talk about on a high level. And then there's just a specific task like landing on an aircraft carrier at night. That's maybe 1 minute of ultra sensitivity and you and your airplane, and there's nothing else in the world that's going to get in the way of your concentration to do that well. And sometimes you're good at it, and sometimes you're not.
Well, that brings up an awesome point. I've been trying to figure out what's been interesting to me about connecting the short and long-term decision making. And I think before we started this conversation, Clarice, you were talking about not drinking coffee, but we were also talking about listening. You know, Charlie asked you a question about how noisy those boats are. They're really noisy. But Charlie, you know, you bring up an awesome point. Situational awareness of what's happening around you, paying attention to it and having it just kind of in the subconscious, in the conscious, in and out of that, and having this big picture. Clarice, you kind of have to have this, what did you call it, Charlie? Super situational awareness or whatever. You kind of have to have that in terms of the noise of the boat, and all these different parts are working. All your systems are working. The boat's moving, the sails are up, the autopilot's working, the engine might be running for generation, other things might be happening. Would you call that like a hyper situational awareness too, in terms of the noises you're listening to and the things you're managing? There's so many things.
Yes, well, it's a little bit different, I guess, because it lasts longer and because we don't have the same purpose. I mean, the main purpose I have at sea is to be happy at sea, because I'm just doing a race, I'm just doing a competition. So if I'm not happy at sea, it does not make much sense to be there. And what I feel is incredible, and it's something I felt after almost 3 weeks at sea when I started to be in the Southern Oceans during the Vendée Globe, is you really have the feeling that the boat is you and you are the boat, and it's almost as if the rest of the world does not exist anymore, and your whole planet is this boat. And I almost felt selfish. I mean, I received text messages from people on Earth, from people on the ground, who told me this is happening or this is happening, and I didn't feel any concern about it. I mean, I was really in my world, on my planet, on my boat, and everything made sense to me on my boat, like the course I was choosing, the way I was trimming my sails, the way I was feeling in my body. If I felt tired, but it felt it was a way of feeling tired that was okay. I was able to eat well. I was able to enjoy the scenery. I was able to really feel that the boat was moving forward in the right direction. And this is what I would define as a flow state. It's a sort of perfect balance that is made of so many different things. And you really have the feeling that the boat is alive, and you're alive in this boat, and you're alive thanks to this boat. And it's one of the things I really am looking for when I'm going offshore racing. It's because I really love this state. I really love this feeling of having just one purpose, which is to just move forward and sail on my boat.
Awesome. And I know that the IMOCAs that you're sailing, every year they go faster. And the one thing that I'm kind of taking away from what you were saying in this, after 3 weeks, this kind of this bubble that you're in, and everything's just moving and you're happy and it's all working. You're really in tune with everything. But if you put Charlie or I on that boat in the middle of that trip and you were doing 25 knots, I think, even though Charlie's a pilot, I know I certainly would have some anxiety of things coming at us so fast and getting bounced around. And you get into that, like you said, that flow state for yourself is things maybe slow down for you a little bit. And Charlie, is it like that in your situation too? Even in high stress situations, do you feel that your training and your preparation, and we'll get to talking about training now, it's psychological training, do you feel that things slow down a little bit?
It depends if you're ahead or behind what you're doing. It's sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So if you're able to anticipate some things, fine. We're talking about that situational awareness, and sometimes your decision making whether you know it or not, you're going down this road where you're getting yourself into a worse situation, and you're going to have to dig yourself out of it, but you don't know. And unfortunately, in aviation, we read accident reports, right? So and then you read from the beginning where these small decisions were made along the way. So that's part of, I think, becoming one out there with your situation, but the small decisions start adding up. So we talk about flying. This is more like, commercial flying is more like being a cruising sailor, right? So, the idea is to be safe at all costs. We don't race to get to the airport or anything. But it's, hours of boredom by moments of sheer terror sometimes. They have those lights in red and these sirens in the cockpit, and that's sort of a trigger to alert you, and it sort of brings you to a different state. That's sort of what happens to us in the airplane. We go through that from simulators, and normally we don't see it in the air, and you'll never hear about it in the back, hopefully, but it happens.
Right. Well, the one thing I wanted to move on to, and I kind of keep pushing off this training idea because I'll leave that till the end, and something that other people will really resonate with here, especially in the foiling community, is both of you have, Clarice, your career right now, I would certainly say that IMOCA sailing, solo sailing around the world, has a high consequence. And that is one thing we talk about with decision-making, that things are, when there are higher consequences, decision-making becomes more important and also more stressful. And obviously, Charlie, anything up in the air, keeping it up in the air is there's a high consequence to your activities up in the air. This involves equipment. And so I know that with solo sailing, a lot of times solo sailors talk about we all the time, and they're usually referring to themselves and their boat, not necessarily themselves and their team on the shore. And I know that we know from watching old war movies and with names painted on the side of fighter jets and stuff like that, that there's a relationship with your equipment, especially when there's a high consequence. So maybe can I talk to you too about how important your relationship is with your equipment and how you care for it? Is it really special? Or, Clarice, do you think about your boat as just any other boat? And Charlie, do you just, when you were on an F-14, did you think about it as just anyone they'll give you, you're fine? Maybe we'll start with Charlie, your relationship with your equipment, and then we'll go to you, Clarice, your special relationship with your equipment.
Yeah, it's funny you use the word relationship. So, you want to love your equipment. It looks great when you first meet your equipment, and then, you want to trust but verify that technology is going to take you there. And sometimes at the worst possible time, it's going to let you down. So that's it's pretty interesting. So, but we're not in the airplane long enough. Even though there's names painted on the sides of airplanes, we don't fly that same airplane, so we don't get to know specific little nuances about the plane. It's the ultimate one design. We don't tinker with them either and try to get them to go faster. So we leave that to somebody else. So as far as trusting the equipment, you're always waiting. You're monitoring. So that's what technology helps us do. It takes our hands off the tiller. Maybe we don't have to look at something constantly, but you have to still monitor. So your workload doesn't decrease. You just made that task smaller in your bucket, and now you have other things that you have to do. So,
right. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, but that helps. And the monitoring side of things too is, servicing and staying on top of things over a short and long period of time is a great lesson that we all learn from people who do things of consequence with consequences. Now, Clarice, it's a little bit different for you. Your boat is your home. And it's also your racing craft, and it's also very technical and extreme piece of equipment. In relationship to a fighter jet, it's the same kind of relationship in your field. So what's your relationship like with your boats?
Yeah, well, I definitely have a strong relationship with my boats. I think it depends on the sailor, but most sailors and solo sailors will tell you that they have the feeling that their boat is alive, especially after 3 months at sea, because it's your home, it's your house, it's your only way of survival. It's the only barrier there is between you and the ocean. So it's a very deep relationship. But we take a lot of care of our boats, because I don't know how to translate it in English, but there is a famous, very famous French sailor who is called Michel Desjoyaux, who won the Vendée Globe.
Twice.
Twice, yes, exactly. Who says during the Vendée Globe, shit happens every day, and it's true. Shit happens every day, and most of the time it's technical shit. I mean, it's something you had not foreseen that happens, and you have to deal with it. You have to find a solution. Sometimes you're going to repair. Sometimes you're just going to have a boat that is going to work a little differently after this shit happened. And so the relationship evolves during the race, because usually you start with a boat that works perfectly well, and at the end a lot of the systems are not going to be perfect. You're going to have to sail as well as you can and as fast as you can with a boat that is not going so well, that a boat that is aging, because after 3 months at sea, that's what happens. Even though it's very well prepared, it happens. Yeah. And what is the thing with which I have a very specific relationship is my autopilot, because when you're alone, you are not driving your boat all the time. Well, you're almost never driving your boat. You really rely on the autopilot, and because of the speed the boat goes, if your autopilot decides to have an issue, it can be very, very, very annoying. I have a lot of memories of my like going for a nap, a 30-minute nap, and being sleeping very well and being very comfy in my sleeping bag, and then having my autopilot deciding for no reason at all, or not a reason I could explain, to do a 360. And the boat is going at 20 knots or maybe higher speed, and so everything goes wrong, and when you wake up the boat is just completely upside down, and when you go out all the sails are completely upside down, and the keel is upside down, and the nothing is okay, and it takes you like 45 minutes to go on the right track, and usually you've broken something, not always something important, but so when it happens, and it has happened to me only 3 times during 3 months, but even though it was only 3 times, so it started after a month and a half, so it was only maybe almost every 2 weeks, between a month and a half and the end of the race. But because it had happened once, I was always thinking, is it going to happen again? And you just lose this confidence in your autopilot, and it makes huge damage on the way you're going to sleep and the way you're going to trust your systems and your equipment. And it's a huge training, and it's a huge work to be able to think about something else and to go to sleep and to go for a nap, knowing that maybe your autopilot is going to make a little trick like this.
Well, that is a perfect segue to our last topic, which is training, psychological training. And we talked to big wave surfer and foiling pioneer Dave Kalama in one of our pre-recorded sessions, and he talked about doing a downwind foil paddle where he always thought something was looking at him. He decided to ignore it. Then he finally looked at it because he couldn't go on anymore without looking. And it was a 15-foot tiger shark that was following him in the middle, like out way offshore. And so he freaked out. Luckily, there was a jet ski there. He paddled up to it. But it's right past an area where he goes all the time. So he came up with a psychological tool to help him get over that fear, because he felt like it was going to happen all the time, every time he passed that piece of ocean. Charlie, and we have 10 minutes now. So training, psychological training, just like Clarice was saying, how do you get over a worry? Let's say you made a mistake in one of your missions, and you were fearful that it was going to happen again. I think Top Gun even had stories about getting over your fears, right?
Can you tell us if Top Gun is realistic?
Yeah, exactly. Is Top Gun real? And how do you train to get over your fears?
Some of it was real, but the part where they said the F-14 was antiquated, yeah, that was real, even when I was flying it. But that brings up a good point. It may not be your fault or your decision that causes something, but just like Clarice is saying, the autopilot fails. We had a period with the F-14 where the planes were exploding for no reason. There would be a problem with the engine. Turbine fans would liberate, go through flight controls, and the airplane would disintegrate in the air. And
Jesus.
very little chance of survival, but you got to keep flying this airplane.
Wow.
And
Right.
that
So
psychologically, you when you're in your 20s, I think you feel pretty indestructible. So you try to just push it aside, but you're always thinking in the back of your mind, you feel a vibration in the plane. You're like, is that it? is it happening? Until they put a light in the plane that said that, you're about to have this burn through, and we actually could respond to it. But when you didn't know it was going to happen, you don't know if it's going to affect the performance of your plane. It is very scary. So I think you try to block it out and move on with the mission and concentrate on something else, because it's a matter of taking the things that you can control and control those things. And I think that's what most people would sort of shift to and say, focus on the things that you have control over, because worrying about something that you can't even see happening is not going to help.
Does your training tell you that, or does your experience tell you that?
Probably experience.
Yeah.
I don't think you survive in the community if you can't get through that. I mean,
Right. But I guess what I'm asking is, as a pilot, is there a segment of your training that talks about letting things go like that, and giving you tools, a toolkit for that? Or is it a little bit, you have to make it up as you go?
I went through training a little longer ago, so I don't, they didn't have it. I would say no, there was zero. Deal with it was is the old school answer.
It might be a little different now.
I'm sure it's different now. And I'd talk to someone who's current and going through training to see, because, mentally, these things, we know they do affect people, and they do affect your performance. And even things, you go out on a 6-month cruise on the carrier and things are happening at home. People realize that something's happening at home. He just received the letter. He's not so good in the air today. Why is that? You think you've blocked it out, but you didn't. Right. So you need help with that. And you need to give people tools to deal with that. And I'm sure they do a better job with that these days.
Right. And as we were talking about consequence, like right now I'm sitting out here looking at some of the best moth sailors in the world, some of the best catamaran and foiling sailors in the world, but they can come in at the end of the day and recoup, and there's not a lot of consequence. For you, Clarice, obviously you have to deal with things yourself. And like Charlie is saying, if you get some bad news, there's no one there you can't just take a break, or as they say in Point Break or whatever that movie was, you can't just call time out and walk into the beach. So you were a member of Pol Finisterre, the training group in Port La Flore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you guys, what's on the psychological side of things? How have you prepared for the decision making at sea and keeping focused, even though you're worried about your autopilot failing or other issues?
Well, at least my boat cannot explode, or it is less likely to happen. So I felt like the problems, the range of problems is much smaller than on an F-14 fighter plane. But well, the thing is, I'm not very experienced on this topic, because when I prepared for my Vendée Globe, I had only 17 months of preparation. So I had to make choices, and I really focused mainly on the sailing part, because it's a sport in which you have to just go out there and sail and repeat as many times as you can the situation, so that you gain experience. And so I didn't think much about preparing my brains and preparing mentally for the Vendée Globe. And maybe that's why it was such a huge challenge during the Vendée Globe, because I had to discover almost everything. And I really learned it the hard way, because I had to just find solutions in my mind and in my, just by myself. But since I came back, so it was almost a year and a half now, I started to be a little bit more accompanied on this subject, because I think it's very, very important, and specifically if you think about performance, because it's the only way of being able to sleep well, to make proper decisions, and not to, because during my Vendée Globe, I spent so much energy asking myself questions and trying to anticipate and to control things I could not control. And this is really the thing I need to work on. And right now I have people helping me on that, and I'm especially focusing on I don't know how meditation and and even we call it in French auto-hypnosis or auto-hypnosis or auto-hypnosis. I don't know if it makes sense in English. And
maybe self-hypnosis.
Self-hypnosis, yeah.
Yeah.
These techniques help me have a little, you know, sometimes when you're tired and alone on your boat and you're just focused on moving forward, you forget to just take a step back and have a look at the situation with a clear eye. And these techniques, I think, are going to help me find this clear eye and this different mindset that I need to find when I'm by myself on my boat. And I'm really expecting a lot from these techniques.
Awesome. And we talked, maybe I think it was before this call about NASA, astronaut training. And there has been research with solo sailors from the aerospace industry and from the, from NASA and other schools, other areas to explore what solo sailors go through, because they live and work. You live and work in an extreme environment. And Charlie has spent a good part of his adult life living and working in extreme environments as well. I mean, geez, Charlie, even after being in the extreme environment of a jet plane, you have to live on a ship. Now, your ship may roll a little bit slower than Clarice's, but to most of us, that's an extreme environment. Well, we're going to start to wrap this up now. Thank you both for joining us. And I think, some of my takeaways from listening to both of you are prioritizing. I know I'm just spent the last year learning how to wing foil, on a board and a hydrofoil and a hand wing. And, if I lost concentration at all, even now, after a year, if I lose concentration at all, like I see a seagull go by, I'll just explode and just go out of the water. And so I listened to Charlie's comment about, numero uno, when you feel like decision-making is overwhelmed, you go to some of the basic priorities, which is keep the plane off the ground. And I think Clarice is keep the water out of the boat and keep the rig upright, like my friend Andy tells me. So I think that's a good takeaway for this, but also, the situational awareness and the prioritizing that you talked about. I think that's something, like Clarice is saying, I think we all need some more work on that. And as we sail boats with more consequence in Foiling Week, we're really lucky, I think, that we don't have as many accidents as we've had with boats doing, tiny little 10-foot boats doing 25 knots coming at each other. And that starts to become 50-knot closing speeds. And, if you've ever been in a car, I don't think many of us have been in car accidents at 50 miles an hour, or something like that. That hurts. I know Charlie knows what it's like to go from 100 or 200 or 300 to 0. That hurts too.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, exactly. But maybe, I guess I'll just give you guys an opportunity to give a last word. You have any recommendations to people that are trying, what can be dangerous things or extreme sports? You guys have built your ways up in your careers. If anyone tried to jump on even a commercial airplane, they can get really hurt trying to pilot it. And if anyone tried to sail an IMOCA today, like Clarice's and all the others, they can get in a lot of trouble. They can break the boat. They can break themselves. They can really hurt themselves. Any recommendation to people who are getting into extreme activities? I think maybe Clarice, let's start with you.
Well, I don't know.
Well, you did it in 17 months, so.
I think you have to accept that you're not going to be able to anticipate all the problems. So you just have to the way I prepared, as far as I am concerned, is if I thought about the Vendée Globe and doing this all around the world race, it felt too big and too dangerous and too ambitious for me. So I just focused on the little steps to take me to this goal. And so I focused first on being able to sail double-handed on these boats, and then to be able to sail on these boats, but not in a race, taking my boat from Brazil to France, but not thinking about competition. Then I did my first solo race, but it was much smaller than the Vendée Globe. So I would recommend taking step after step, if you can, if it's possible on the sport you're thinking about. But that's I think the thing that I did the best to prepare for the Vendée Globe. I think it was really to because I was so passionate about the Vendée Globe. I was thinking about it all the time. It was my main motivation. All the energy I had was coming from this goal, but I was not thinking about it all the time in the sense that I was focusing on little goals, not too big for me.
Perfect. That's a great piece of advice. Like my wife always tells me, how do you eat an elephant? And it's one bite at a time.
Exactly.
Charlie, how about you? Last word on giving some advice to people that are trying to do something pretty extreme. And like we often do, getting into these new classes and getting into new designs.
I think just to compound what Clarice said is, you're working your way up to it, but on top of that, the thing you can control is your vessel and how you sail your boat, and spending the most time as you can in it, because that's the most controllable aspect you have. And to know your limitations, because if you're out sailing a lot and even in flying, you don't start off landing a jet on the aircraft carrier. You go out in a prop plane and you learn the basic skills and you work your way up. So the same goes for sailing, and you don't expect to be ace of the base, in the Moth Fleet, your first regatta against, all the world champions. So, have your expectations, set your goals, set reasonable goals so you don't discourage yourself, and keep trying to do better with that. And one bite at a time, as you say.
That's awesome. Well, thank you both. And we'll catch up with Julia another time on similar topics. But I'm really glad you both decided to join us. It's nice to bring in different people into Foiling Week. We have discussed the IMOCA class for the Vendée Globe and the other solo races around the world, but very rarely do we speak with the skippers. And as those designers give faster and faster boats that are harder and harder to live on, we forget about the pilots. And it's great to have two pilots talking today. And I'm glad you two got to meet. I know we're learning a lot from both of you, and I like Clarice's meditation idea. Charlie, that might be a new tip for you and your pilot friends.
I'll look into it.
I think we can teach old dogs new tricks.
That's right.
Great, you two. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us. That's all from this session of Foiling Week. We're rolling. We've got like 13, 14, 15 sessions. We have the Foiling Film Festival that we're going to hear a lot about going forward in this week. We have a bunch of events and trials. And again, we're crossing the full range of our Foiling Week community. So thank you so much for joining us. Charlie, Clarice from France, Charlie from Guatemala City. Jeez. Our sports and everything we do takes us all over the world. And we're glad to see it. So thank you again. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate it. So, ciao.